I am many. I am one. I accept this sacred work to be given into my hands, to attend the temple of the first flame and carry it within me. I will not be blinded by the light, for I am its bearer. I will not flee from darkness, for it is within me. And I will endure what I must, to know, to dare, to will, to remain silent, for myself, for my species, for my planet, and for the great work of magic.
Welcome to Fool's Guide to the Occult. I'm the Summer Breeze.
And I'm Luxa, and today we are talking about initiation.
Yeah, I'm really stoked about this episode right now. As we're writing this, I'm also sort of going through the process of designing this for myself. I'm working on, sort of going through a transitional period, as I think many of us probably are. Taking a hard look at just like a lot of things, aspects of my life, stuff like that, where I want to be, how to make it happen, and how to move forward. A lot of that is about like my mundane life, I guess, if you want to use SCA terms, but it's very informed by like my personal code of honor and duality, I guess. So I think I'll have some interesting stuff to share in our journaling section, probably our next episode. But speaking of journaling, before we get started with this episode, we should probably do a bit of journaling now, shouldn't we?
Yeah, definitely. Let's do that.
All right. So, our last episode, we talked about ego magic. So, let's see what we have in that vein of things.
All right, sounds good. All right, so I loved what you said earlier about defining a path for yourself. And there's a lot of room for flexibility in many other like traditions too. So if that's your thing and that works for you, that's super cool too. Like you said, I think a lot of us are at a place right now where we're kind of taking a hard look at things. There's so much opportunity for introspection lately.
Yeah.
Personally, in addition to integrating my practice into more areas of my life, one of my goals for this year has been to sort of enhance the practice too. And these things are actually two sides of the same coin. It's like more bandwidth, maybe. Anyway, I've been able to progress and sort of get rid of some blocks and stuff. It's been cool but challenging in some unforeseen ways, but I guess that most things worth doing are challenging. But there's also been some really fun stuff, like my experiment with group ego magic. I've been doing a lot with energy stuff. I had made the observation that the throat chakra, if you want to use that terminology, never seemed to like be as good as some of the other ones. But addressing my issues with shyness a little bit has already helped to improve this. And also, while we're on the topic, I'd like to make a short point about ego magic that I don't think I mentioned in our last episode. So here goes. The systems in place that exist to keep us in our places must first be overcome in one's own mind before they can be addressed or even sometimes observed in the outside world. Okay, now I'm just saying, we might do well to work in whatever quiet way we can to subvert and undermine these systems, especially insofar as to reduce their control on us by means of our own conditioning. Anyway, what have you been up to?
um, well, this is probably a better journal entry for your side project than for this show, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yay.
Um, so I mean, being pent up in the house for a very long time now. I'm not honestly
Mm-hmm.
sure how long it's been anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Um, I've gotten a little shall we say? um, like I don't know. Like I have Tinder on my phone. I'm looking at it every once in a while, and it's like, hey, you haven't been on in a while. It gives you those like little push notifications, right? And I'm like, what's even the point of having this on my phone? I can't or shouldn't meet people. We're probably stuck in this situation for several more months. It's like a bigger joke than it ever was. I don't know. Um, I can see how some people might think this journal entry is going to go downhill quick. And I guess depending on your perspective and degree of domestication slash colonization or repression, you might not be wrong. But in instead of overindulging in the typical, often tasteless and sometimes, frankly, disturbing nature of the most of the modern erotica industry, I've been doing two things. One is exploring the history of that, which includes reading actual books on the topic, which there are surprisingly several, as well as looking at the shall we say primary sources. Through like this reading and looking at stuff, I'm finding like erotica seem to have like a bit more class, shall we say, 50, 100 years ago. I've been reading probably, well, several contemporary articles about people's reactions to like, the human form, nudity in art, public nudity, primarily focusing on the United States since I live there. I know this stuff is kind of different. Like if you're tuning in from Europe or some other parts of the world, like people tend to be a little less shamed about their body, maybe. I don't know. There's like, definitely from what I understand, there's more like nudity is like not as big of a deal as it is here. So I'm starting to think like the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s probably died in like the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure people these days are really as liberated as they think they are, which has caused me to think a lot about like my own thoughts, like metacognition, haha, thinking about my thoughts and feelings and assumptions and standards of beauty and so forth, and really trying to break down like what those conditionings are, those conditioned things are, like you were talking about earlier, versus what is who I am as a person. So there's not a lot of specific ego magic per se in there, but definitely ego work, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important work. I mean, whatever you want to call it, right? And side note, bragging about how classy your taste is a fun flex. So that's cool. I'm looking forward to hearing about what you discover in your research. I actually have a ton to say about this topic. There's a lot we could go into in terms of like the psychology and all kinds of other things, but I think I will save most of it for when we talk about sex magic. But I will say this, I definitely agree with you about people not being as liberated as they think they are these days. But I think we're working on it, maybe. I don't know. I actually did something kind of similar to what you're talking about in terms of like deconditioning a while back. So, one super simple technique I found especially effective was to go and sit at the beach and watch all the people walk by while accessing what Carol might call the green gnosis. I
Hmm.
think we touched on this in our last episode. Anyway, in this case, I might be able to sum it up even more simply by saying sit on the beach and look at the people as you meditate on the unique beauty of each individual uh, you see until you like kind of go into gnosis, or even more simply, like open your heart and your eyes at once and just really, really look. Just look and interrogate your reactions, like do a little bit of like insight there. Repeat, and then imagine yourself that you're that person. What is it like to be them? Maybe you already are them. Wear sunglasses when you do this, guys.
Oh my god, really?
Depending on the situation, people might get freaked out because they think that you're staring at them, which I guess you sort of are. It's not as creepy as it sounds, I promise.
You definitely are staring at people.
I did this several times over the course of a few months before I really started to like notice results in the way I was thinking. But yeah, I do. I actually still do it sometimes. You could obviously do this anywhere, right? I like the beach because of the association with Venus, but you typically also get to see more of people there, so it could be more effective. There are a lot of ends that this type of reprogramming can serve beyond expanding one's like own taste past the like mundane or mainstream notions of attractiveness. And side note, many of which are riddled with problematic issues too numerous to address here. So, further, so many of our beauty standards are like the result of marketing, whether it's direct, like in the form of advertising, or through like less direct ways, like movies and things.
Hmm.
So there seems to be like this constant low level of like emotional abuse towards the individual, especially in creating like notions of inadequacy where buying a product or service can alleviate these inadequacies. So, yeah, they create the problem and then they can sell you the solution for it. But I will read you more of my manifesto later.
Yeah, and remind me that we have to talk about Venus at some point. But
Okay.
yeah. Uh I'm right there with you. I took a class my junior year in college called Art in the Human Body, which was all about like beauty standards in different cultures over or around the world across time. From like some of the earliest depictions of the human form, like Venus of Willendorf, to like the modern day. It was super fascinating. But there is a second thing I've been working on that I think is at least somewhat worth noting here. I've been doing, well, thinking about and doing a little bit of like redesigning of self presentation for like when this whole mess is over and I can go out and see people again, or maybe like self style is part of it. I don't know. Anyway, magic is all about will and intention and energy, and as such, I think there's like a lot of magic in like carefully and intentionally selected wardrobe, including like style, color, as well as rethinking like mannerisms, ways of speaking, like just like generally how you move and act and interact with the world. All of this leads to the energy you give off or draw in, or just like how, I don't know, how you're able to interact with the social sphere, I guess.
Mm.
So as an artist thinking about this, it's really great and fun because I actually get to sort of design some of my own stuff that I'm going to wear and things like that. And I have the time to actually work on those projects, which is kind of cool. But to really get a sense of where to go, I guess I've not only been looking at contemporary fashion trends, but also like lists of basically sex symbols for the past several decades, going back to the 20s. And, you know, the Roaring Twenties seems to be in vogue right now, despite the history not really being exactly what most. I've been using all of that to sort of redesign myself in some ways. Obviously, there will be some more direct ego magic going into all of that later on, but I probably won't have time until like June or so. When I'm done teaching chillins.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it definitely. I think a lot of people are up to this right now. A little glamour magic, I would say. So that's cool. So, okay. Should we talk about initiation? I feel like we've been talking about a lot of other stuff.
Is that what this episode's about? I
I
thought we were.
thought,
Are we recording an episode right now? I thought
oh
we were
shit,
just
are
gonna
we recording?
get on. We're definitely recording. I don't know. I thought we
Well,
were just gonna shoot the shit for an hour.
all right.
Is that what this
So,
giant pile of notes is for?
all right. What is initiation in a broad sense?
All right. There's a lot of similarity between the idea of initiation and rites of passage. So in a sense, initiation is a rite of passage. It's just a spiritual one. As many rites of passage are about rebirth or birth in general, or adulthood, becoming a citizen, a full member of a tribe or a clan. Initiation is about rebirth, but like into spiritual life, like entry into a coven or a group of practitioners or like a church. There's even initiation ceremonies in Christianity and all kinds of other religions. So often initiation will involve like many other rituals, the reenactment of some kind of myth. For example, initiation into Freemasonry involves the reenactment of the death of Hiram Abiff, the supposed master mason responsible for overseeing the construction of King Solomon's temple, the first temple of Jerusalem. The initiate symbolically dies and is reborn. In fact, these death and rebirth initiation rituals mirror the myth of the dying god, which I know we've gone over to varying degrees in earlier episodes. This is a very common theme in religion among both, I guess, deities as well as people initiated in their tradition.
Yeah, it is a classic.
Yeah. But before we get into the spiritual side of things, though I will endlessly argue that all aspects of our experience are entwined and thus spiritual, let's discuss some historical and anthropologic examples. Anthropological examples of rites of passage.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. And in regards to all things being intertwined, you will get no argument from me.
All right. We're going to start out our episode today taking a look at. So, as Rebecca and Philip Stein pointed out in the Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft, rites of passage are the rituals that, of any and every culture, have been of the most interest and subjected to the greatest degree of study, I guess, by anthropologists. When I was doing my coursework almost a decade ago now, my undergrad coursework in anthro, we discussed these rituals pretty extensively in my cultural anthropology courses. Rites of passage mark a change in status of an individual within the context of that given society or cultural operating system. And with that change, there are new expectations and behavior, style of dress, mannerisms, ways of speaking, like just in general, how you interact with the community.
So yeah, I mean, in this case, the initiation is just as much for the benefit of like the surrounding society as it is for the initiate or the person going through the rite of passage. It's about like knowing that someone is going to have like a new role to play in their culture, right?
Yeah, exactly. The rite of passage, just like a spiritual initiation, imprints a social change in the psyche of the people participating in the ritual. As the Steins point out in their book, it also grants community approval. Modern examples of this include like graduation or wedding ceremonies. In Judaism, there's the coming of age ceremonies, the bar and bat mitzvahs for boys and girls, at which time they're considered like responsible for their own actions. In the anthropology of magic and witchcraft, the authors point out that the life cycle rites of passage are very common. Like such ceremonies that honor birth and change in status from childhood to adulthood, like the previous example, marriage, death, and so forth. There are also political rites of passage and ceremonies, like I don't know, when someone gets elected to office or ascends the throne or something like that, as well as religious ceremonies, which we will primarily be discussing today. But before we dig into all the general structure of these ceremonies, I'd like to give a couple more specific examples of rites of passage, some of which are more or less ceremonial than others. But here we go. First day of school, turning 16, or however old you need to be to get your driver's permit wherever you live respectively. Puberty, signing up for the votes or signing up for the draft, like losing your virginity can be a rite of passage for people. The first time you ever smoked or drank alcohol, or the first time you ever did those things legally. The first time you ever did a drug. Marriage, again, is an example. I guess divorce, in a way, could be considered one of these as well. Job promotion. Those are just a few that come to mind.
Yeah, one example that somebody pointed out to me was boot camp in the military. It's this process of like conducting these repeated actions in this kind of ritual way for an extended period of time. At least that's how it was explained to me. I've never been.
No, either have I. I've had family and friends who served and such. I read this document written by a ex boot camp drill instructor who explained a variety of things that they do in boot camp, in basic training, are the same things, or a lot of the same things that cult leaders will do to like break down new members of their cults to make them compliant, like keeping people up for extremely long hours, like sleep deprivation, working people beyond the state of exhaustion. These things are like really effective in breaking someone down and opening them up to like re-imprinting or rewriting their programming. Don't get me wrong, I fully support having a standing military. I don't think brainwashing people is morally acceptable even in a time of war. But moving on.
Man. I'd like to hear people who have been through it think too. Like, so let us know. I mean, this is a super interesting topic, obviously sticky. Um, I feel like I don't really know enough to have like a strong opinion, but I wouldn't super be surprised. I mean, considering like a lot of companies use like management techniques that could be called cult like in order to like make employees feel like they have or that they're a part of an organic community instead of a transactional relationship, right? I'm just saying. Anyway,
No, yeah, for sure. I know some of the companies you're talking about, and it's very culty. But hey, so the Steins point out three phases of rites of passage. The first being the separation of the individual from their previous status, which they point out can happen instantly with like some kind of ceremony by symbolic means, or it can take place over an extended period of time, such as during a trial of some kind. The second part is the transitional phase, which brings about the change in status. Similarly, this can take place like quickly and symbolically, or again over a period of several years, such as like a apprenticeship or something like that. Finally, there must be like an incorporation or an end to the transitional phase, leading to the recognition of their new status. The transitional phase in some, I don't really like using the word tribal, but First Nations people, or I don't know, in some other societies are marked by like seclusion, or some kind of separation from the core group. Like maybe a small group of people will be taken off, like maybe a bunch of kids that are about to be like initiated into adulthood or something like that, and they'll be like separated from the core group or their families. And then sometimes these changes are also marked by an alteration to the body. Many people, even today, tend to get like tattoos or piercings marking great significant changes in their life. I personally have done this, 3 times now.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually only have one tattoo, and I definitely got it to mark like a very significant event. In my case, it was a commitment to a new way of life.
Yeah, I have one for that, and one for a painful memory, and one for spiritual awakening.
Nice.
But I've also read an article from a guy who is like a follower of Santa Muerte, who got a tattoo as a sacrifice and show of devotion to her. But other examples of this include just like changing of clothes, hairstyle, body painting, more permanent changes like tattooing, scarification, piercing. Tooth filing is one, tooth coloring as well. Branding, head shaping, although that tends to be like something you have to do when the person is like a baby. Circumcision, pilgrimages sometimes mark ceremonies as well, or like a quest of some kind, like having to go out and, I don't know, seek something.
Yeah, definitely. So we can find countless examples of what initiation looks like in our culture and in other societies. But like, what about in more esoteric terms? So to get us started, I'd like to throw out a quick quote from Juan Milo Duquette's Son of Chicken Kabbalah, where the purpose of these types of rituals is defined as awakening the student to be educated. The idea is to trigger the process by putting the student through a series of artfully designed emotional, psychological experiences that essentially mutate the individual on a subconscious level, a process known as initiation. So I'm sort of a fan of Duquette, so I wanted to toss that in here. But what are some other definitions?
All right. Well, according to the Watkins Dictionary of Magic, magical initiation is defined as a magic ceremony involving a sense of transition or self transformation. The subject may be shown new symbolic mysteries, given a secret name or words of power, or granted a higher ceremonial rank in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn system of magic, from which most forms of modern Western occultism have evolved. There were different grades of initiation for each level of the Kabbalistic tree of life, leading up to the experience of spiritual rebirth in
Tifereth.
candidate. Attaining the grade associated with that would then proceed to the membership of the inner order. In many occult traditions, magicians take a new name or motto to reflect their new statement of new state of attainment. Magical initiation may be formally acknowledged unless the candidate has a particular visionary experience that confirms his or her new magical status. In Wicca, there are 3 initiations, culminating in the Great Rite that is depending on what tradition you are involved with. And that is all according to the Watkins Dictionary of Magic.
No, that's cool. I just real quick, Tifereth. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I've only seen it written, but it's the sixth Sephiroth of the Tree of Life in the Kabbalistic tradition, and it is beauty. So there you have it. Anyway,
Oh,
back to you.
nice. Cool. Yeah, Kabbalah is not something I'm too experienced with at this point, but
Me
uh,
either.
you know, I'll get there. So much
Me
to
too.
learn.
Me too.
As Raymond Buckland points out in Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, there's a catharsis, a spiritual cleansing. The person becomes, in effect, another person. A simple example that covers probably both this spiritual cleansing and transformation is the rite of baptism among Christians. I really appreciate rereading through Buckland's chapters on rites of passage and initiation, though. And if you have the book kicking around, it's lesson 4, pages 41 through 49. Dish on Llewellyn Publishing all you want, but one thing I really appreciate about Buckland's book, though there are some issues with it, but he does include like a great deal of historical background as well as anthropological and sociological analysis of the topics he discusses, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. And also hot takes on Llewellyn, right?
Oh, yeah. There seems to be a trend right now among at least some circles of operating under the perspective that if it isn't like hardcore, deeply ritualized, scrubbed of any kind of fluffy bunny stuff, it's garbage. And I think this is a little bit of a cynical and frankly depressing way to go. Most people seem to dish on Llewellyn primarily because of Silver Raven Wolf. And, we've heard this from one or two people in the past. Basically, the argument I've received a couple times is very kind of goes like this: like SRW is not an authority on witchcraft. When I think what people mean is she's not an authority on Wicca. So maybe there's some noise there for those of you that are following our Patreon discussion about quantum psychology and Robert Anton Wilson. But I suppose this is a fine time to reiterate something I've tried to point out in the first few episodes of our very first season. But here goes again. There's a huge difference between Wicca and witchcraft. Witchcraft is the use of magic to achieve specific ends and is employed in many traditions and paths, including Wicca. Wicca itself is a religion that employs the use of witchcraft. Witchcraft does not belong to Wicca. It has existed since prehistoric times, longer than we can trace it back, and has been employed by people all over the world, from the American continent to Europe to Africa to Asia, and the archaeological and anthropological evidence of which is far reaching.
Yeah, dude, I think those are pretty good distinctions to point out because there does seem to be a lot of confusion surrounding those terms, like Wicca and witchcraft. And this is actually for a pretty good reason. As Neville Droy points out in Stealing Fire from Heaven, the term Wicca is derived from the Old English word for a practitioner of witchcraft. So, all right, maybe we can sum it up like this, though. Little Venn diagram here. All Wiccans are practitioners of witchcraft, but not all practitioners of witchcraft are Wiccan.
I like it.
All right, so yeah, we're planning to talk more about Wicca in future episodes, so I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about that. As far as Silver Raven Wolf goes, though, I definitely have heard that there's some controversy there.
Yeah. All right. This isn't really what this episode is about, but let's just clear the air and throw it all out there, or at least do our best. I think. Um, I'll go into a little bit of detail here uh, about the whole thing. I guess here's my little opinion piece. You ready?
Yeah, I do it.
All right. So the issue most people seem to have with SRW, other than her so-called fluffy bunny approach, and seriously, folks, if you don't have a little silliness in your life, you are headed down Ebenezer Scrooge Lane. All right.
God, chill out, guys.
But yeah, totally. But the other issues that people seem to have with her are relatively valid, right? And some of
Mhm.
them are more valid than others, but the other arguments are pretty valid. That still doesn't invalidate all of her work. No, I haven't read it all. She's written a lot of crap. Well, a lot of stuff. Um, when I first got into all this stuff, when I was like 12, I had the Teen Witch book. It was given to me. I read it. It's fine for children. And then I got Solitary Witch a few years later, which I still have kicking around and sometimes use as a reference. But most of my other experience with Wicca and the occult in general is like totally outside of Silver Raven Wolf. She sometimes is a bit anti-Christian, kind of problematic given her like credo and stuff. but, like, I don't know, that's a whole 'nother thing, like, there's stuff there. Some of her views and opinions on Wicca definitely differ from other people's. Again, like, it's a really diverse practice at this point with a lot of different sects and traditions and things going on. Yeah, so, like, her practices and ideas are different because every witch is different, every practitioner is different, every coven is different. One of the other arguments is, like, her name is silly, and, like, if that's the reason you're gonna hate somebody, you're the next witch we should burn. Um, so some more valid arguments, include that, people have accused her of spreading some misinformation. I'm not entirely sure which specific things they're talking about there. Again, I haven't read all of her work. You know, Again, that could be, like, a matter of opinion for people. It's probably based on a lot of assumptions about what Wicca is and isn't. Other criticisms include that, all of her books and research and stuff is just, like, research based and not contributing anything new to the body of work. I can see that being kind of a problem, but honestly, like, I think secondary sources are fine as long as there's something useful in there in some way. The tone of her work sometimes comes off with a little bit of maybe, sometimes she might perpetuate some myths and outdated ideas, I guess. I mean, that's also the case with a lot of other people. I think a lot of the people that I know that have criticized her of this kind of stuff, like perpetuating myths and outdated ideas or like being racist. They're also the same people that have Helena Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall in their libraries, who have definitely come up with far more outlandish ideas and blatant racism in their work. If you can't read around the author's ego and pick out the details that are useful to you and practical to you, then personally, maybe books aren't really the best way for you to learn this stuff. Um, there are other ways, um, but, like, here's kinda, like, my bottom line. A lot of her work is probably best for young Wiccans, like preteens and teens, and, probably ones that don't have pagan parents who can't already, like, share this stuff with them and help them, like, learn. Like, a lot of her work is just written in that way, and friends, it's fine. Just it's fine. You don't like her stuff, don't read it.
All right. I just want to respond real quick.
Go ahead.
Um, I I agree with you. If you don't like her work, don't fucking read it. You know what? Who cares? You're obviously entitled to your opinions, right? It does seem like some of the criticism is valid, though. Like, I'm actually not super familiar with her work. I read a copy of a friend's like Solitary, which a long time ago, but I was always drawn to like a little bit of a different aesthetic. But it seems like some people are pissed off at her for telling teens to lie in order to keep their practice secret from their parents. And some people seem mad because, as you said, she has some critical things to say about Christianity, and her critics feel that, she shouldn't like have included these like shots at another religion in her book about a separate religion. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, I think that's valid too, especially if she's like, I love everyone, but fuck Christians, like, if that's what she's saying, then yeah, that sounds kind of hypocritical. Like,
Right. Satanism kinda does that.
yeah, you're kind of right. So, I mean, lots of things to interrogate. There are some people in my life who I'm close to and who I love who are like evangelical Christians, right? They have a lot of books about what Christians should do to fight against witchcraft and occultism and everything. I've seen these books on their bookshelves. It's funny, right? I'm not a particularly evangelical person myself, so I don't say anything. I don't care. But I guess I'm still sort of lying, like those teen witches from those Christian families. I'm not like saying anything about it. I'm not like, hey. But anyway,
I'll say something about it. Kids, if you're listening to this show and the show is rated explicit, but if you are here, and you have to lie to your parents, go ahead. It's okay.
yeah, I mean, yeah, and also it's not like Silver Ravenworth fired the first shot in the debate between, I don't know, paganism and some types of Christianity. Bottom line, think what you want, I guess. I could definitely like see it from both sides.
Yeah, I'll take Silver Raven Wolf's side on this one, and I'm gonna quote Saul Williams. In many households, wisdom no longer comes with age. I had lied to my parents for like 3/4 of my life about who I was, what I believed, both spiritually and politically, and hid like all kinds of aspects of myself. I was taught from a pretty young age that their house wasn't a safe space to be an independent thinker and to explore life. So, if you've got to lie to your family about who you are until you're out on your own, like fucking do what you gotta do, man.
Absolutely. Do what you gotta do. I feel like, unfortunately, this is probably a pretty common experience that people have. I know we've talked a little bit about the stigma that exists relating to the occult. Even if your family is like super nice and chill, you might still fear like being teased or looked down on or whatever. And we're social animals. Nobody wants to be ostracized. But anyway, it seems like another thing that people are mad at Silver Ravenwolf for is that she has her name on this kind of cheesy teen witch kit. So, to get some context, I looked it up, and here is a description from the manufacturer. Okay. Here is everything the novice spellcaster needs to practice the craft of the wise and to be a force for good. Step into the sacred space and discover the secrets of one of the world's oldest mysteries, the art and science of white magic, a gentle, loving practice. this this kit contains a beautifully illustrated book of instruction plus 6 magical talismans, including a silver pentacle pendant, salt, and a spell bag. The kit box converts into your own personal altar. So this is a little cringy, I guess. It's a little funny. But you know what, dude? If somebody sees this shit and they feel like this is a cool, magical thing to them, then that's really the only fucking thing that matters. Like, nobody gets to tell me what my practice should look like. So, you know what? Fuck it. If you're into Fluffy Bunny and all that shit, like, hell yeah, dude. You do you.
Yeah, and that is like super cheesy, but like how much of that was her and how much of that was like her company and like the people that produce her material and the marketing team and that stuff. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Whatever.
Let's leave leave her. Let's leave
Can we
Silver
just go on
Raven.
like a 20-minute rant about Silver Raven Wolf and like Llewellyn Publishing?
We needed to get it out there.
You know what? It's out of my system now though, so like I won't have to bring it up again. And if somebody else like brings it up again, let's come on the show and debate that shit.
Yeah, okay. Leave Silver Ravenwolf alone for now, and we will see what some other authors have to say about the topic of initiation,
All right, all right.
which I swear is what we're here to talk about.
I'm pretty sure we've talked about everything else already. All right, so in their chapters on initiation, both Raymond Buckland and Starhawk point out that there's this like symbolic death thing. We've talked about this a little bit already. That the death of one's old life, such as in the examples given earlier about like initiation into Freemasonry, before being reborn into like a full life or path upon which one is being initiated. There has to be this like death or transition. Starhawk also includes that it is part of one's acceptance into the coven as well as expressing the individual's commitment or dedication to the goddess. Buckland includes several elements of the separation phase of the initiation, including absorption into the study of the craft, meditation on your path to union with the art, ritual cleansing and bathing, fasting, sexual abstinence for at least a day before the ritual. He also describes like ritual binding and blindfolding, as well as renaming, which Starhawk also covers in the Spiral Dance. Now, here's one of the tidbits of this section of Buckland's book, which I think is one of the most important things in this chapter, at least in some ways. A lot of it's all important for different reasons, but it's something that I think a lot of people I've come into contact with, especially in online magical communities and forums, kind of really need to hear. So Buckland writes, years ago, the majority of witches, myself included, frowned on the very idea of self initiation and didn't stop to think of A, what might have been done in old times for those living miles away from a coven, or B, how did the first witch get initiated? He does add a little caveat though. You can only get initiated, or you can only do initiation or self dedication generally. You cannot, for example, initiate yourself into a specific order, such as like Alexandrian Wiccan or something like that. you need someone to initiate you into that. But you can obviously like dedicate yourself to the Wiccan path and the goddess and all that stuff in your own sort of path on your own. But no practitioner of any tradition really has the right or justification to say what is correct or valid for a path outside of their own. So Buckland goes on to describe a self dedication ritual as well as a coven initiation ritual. But I'm going to leave that for Buckland to teach you. So if that is something you really want to get into, you can buy Buckland's book. Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, if you're interested in that.
Yeah, and we obviously agree with Buckland here. While you can't just decide to induct yourself into somebody else's group, there's no reason that you can't perform initiation rituals on your own of your own design on your own to mark important milestones in your own personal practice. Maybe you prefer to work alone, or you're not currently in contact with any other practitioners, or maybe you're uncomfortable sharing your practice with others for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. All this stuff is still accessible to you.
Yeah, done right. And by the end of this episode, I hope that we'll have gone over enough kind of like differences and similarities between a variety of different initiations and stuff like that. That you as a practitioner stuck at home in this time can put together your own initiation ritual. Starhawk includes that traditionally a witch would commit to studying for a year and a day in order to undergo what they described as, or she described as, neurological repatterning in order to effectively do magical work. They also remind us that I keep saying they, she also reminds us that, right, it's better to fall upon my blade and perish than it is to attempt this with fear in my heart, which I've also heard is the attempt part being replaced with enter the circle. So like it's better to fall upon my blade and perish than enter the circle with fear in my heart. Anyway, this is just kind of like general use for a ceremony. However, the point is that the stripping away of fear and embracing new life in the coven and new relationship with the goddess and the horned god. She also reminds us that we must suffer in order to learn. People do not change when they are comfortable. It's pretty fairly universal principle and can be applied to many aspects of life beyond the occult.
Yes, indeed.
Starhawk goes into a bit more detail on her coven specific rite of initiation than Buckland does. Again, I'm not going to give you all of the detail on it because, if you're interested, you should pick up a copy of her book, Spiral Dance, from your local independent bookseller. Or support Powell's books. I do, however, have some notes here that I think are worth running through. Something Starhawk has to add to our previously constructed understanding of initiation is that there's often some form of trial or test. She doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail about this, but rather than describing it for you or, you reading it or whatever, I actually recommend that you check out the documentary, The Occult Experience. I'm pretty sure you can watch it on YouTube for free. It's pretty low quality and grainy, but it's really interesting. And you'll see a couple initiations into various traditions and sort of the trials the initiates go through and stuff like that. And very it's just very interesting. Like it's a cool documentary. I think everyone should see it at some point. So from here, I think it's important to reiterate that each step, word, action, timing, etc., in any ritual, but especially a rite of passage or rite of initiation, is deeply steeped in symbolism. No aspect should or is left without consideration. This is important in creating any kind of powerful ritual, like a full gestalt, unifying the senses with mythological reenactment to fully engage the mind is paramount to being successful in these things. The more theatrical and immersive, the better. You have to participate, to be an active role in the reenacting of the mythology. Often blindfolds are used on initiates, as pointed out earlier on, with forms of binding to sort of represent being caught up and restricted in the womb, because again, this is like part of that rebirth aspect of initiation. Often deities will be invoked or called upon during the ceremony, and often someone will also act as like the sponsor of the initiate. This is seen in Wicca as well as Freemasonry.
Yeah, and I know that in both of those traditions and in Hermeticism too, like the concept of initiation really is kind of central. And so, also, the importance of symbolism here really can't be overstated. In order for practitioners to work effectively together, there needs to be an internal consistency to the system of symbols that they're going to use. And the process of learning these types of symbols, like this, is its own sort of initiation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about rites of passage in modern culture. We've talked about initiations in like sort of a Wiccan sense. Let's take a look at some kind of different stuff, shall we?
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, we're gonna first. The first thing we're gonna check out is some work by Manly P. Hall. He wrote this tome of a book called "The Secret Teachings of All Ages." Very interesting, but I will point out that while Manly P. Hall has some very interesting work out there, he was definitely racist. So that's one of those like things you gotta kind of read around if you're gonna read his stuff.
When was his book? When was this written?
I think like he was writing in like the 20s and 30s.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, context is obviously important when you're reading anything, guys. So you know that already, though.
I don't know. I don't know if that like excuses
Oh no, it doesn't.
anything,
I
but
mean, no,
like
it doesn't excuse it, but it does provides context, is all.
sure, yeah. All right, so in chapter 7 of The Secret Teachings of All Ages, Hall discusses the Great Pyramid of Giza. Naturally, is one of like the 7 wonders of the ancient world. There's going to be all kinds of fantastic stories and disputed histories and stuff like this surrounding such an amazing feat of human ingenuity. Naturally, the pyramid or triangle shape has found its way into many mystical traditions. We could peel back the layers of Hall's mysticism and symbolism and interpretation of the pyramid at some point. But for now, we're just going to stick to sort of our topic because we've gone on several tirades already. He argues that the Great Pyramid was not a lighthouse or an observatory or a tomb, but the first temple of the mysteries. The first structure erected as a repository for the secret truths, which are the certain foundation of all arts and sciences. Now, obviously, the pyramids were tombs. We found mummies in them. Translation of the hieroglyphs in various parts indicate spells about things to be used during the afterlife and to assist in travel through the afterlife. However, with the pharaohs being the high priests of the ancient Egyptian religion and revered as gods themselves, it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that these structures served a dual purpose, if not multiple purposes. According to Hall, the temple is complete only when the initiate themselves becomes the living apex through which divine power is focused into the diverging structure below. And he gives some nice flowery descriptions of the temple as a womb and of rebirth into the mystery traditions and the sacred knowledge of Egypt into in which people entered and then exited as gods, and in which the initiate came to know this sort of timeless master of masters and keeper of all knowledge who would conduct this initiation. He is suggesting that initiation was conducted by the deity and not by like a high priest or something like that, which is interesting, but we can come back to that another time.
Yeah, yeah, that actually sort of makes sense. I mean, psychologically speaking, I mean, it seems like the group would have to have some kind of like higher authority to like cement their hierarchy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think we see this on a lot of different groups, their secret chiefs and things like that. As a side note, it's kind of interesting how many cultures seem to have independently adopted the use of pyramids or pyramid-like structures. I guess it is super stable, so I guess it, makes sense from that standpoint. I guess it also kind of is reminiscent of mountains, which is one of the places that one can traditionally go to seek enlightenment or knowledge or whatever.
Yeah, and that's why much or almost all of the pyramids worldwide were temples, which gives, I guess, a little bit of extra, maybe anecdotal evidence towards this use for the Great Pyramids in Egypt. But like the point being that the higher you are on or just the higher up you are in general, the closer you were to the gods. So I mean, the Egyptian pyramids were a little different because you go in them instead of go up them like the ziggurats that you see in like North and South America. Now, what comes next is a lot of esoteric speculation on Hall's part. The Great Pyramid is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, as I said before, so it's subject to all kinds of stories. Was it a tomb, a temple, a power station, a place of communication with extraterrestrial or extra dimensional beings, and so on and so on and so forth? Despite extensive scientific study of the pyramid over, man, more than a century now, we're, still discovering new things about it every couple of years or so, uncovering, this new record that sheds light on blah or, whatever. So I don't know. I would say just don't throw Hall's interpretation out with the bathwater just yet. And even if it does turn out to be nonsense, it's still a delightful imagination of how initiations could be done.
Yeah, man. I mean, the pyramid imagery is definitely something that I'm into. I think everybody kind of likes it. But all right, let's hear these esoteric speculations.
Sure. So Hall claims that the king's chamber, the burial chamber, was where the death ritual or the ritual death and rebirth of the initiation occurred, and was, they were then entombed in the sarcophagus. And hopefully they didn't have to like recite their history of sexual exploits like those kids in the Skull and Bones. Anyway, at this point, the neophyte is said to project out of their body into the astral plane to kind of search for capital T truth. And so, what I got out of this, the first time I read it, and I still get this out of it. I made a little note in the book. I write all over my stuff. But anyway, he's making this claim that like the sarcophagus was used as sort of a sensory deprivation tank. Now, regardless of the factual basis for this, I feel like initiation is a lot about personal truth and dedication, even within, the context of a group or otherwise established practice. So that sort of like time alone with whatever you want to call the forces that be really kind of resonates with me. And also it serves like that, again, that like dual purpose is sort of like the womb, the place of rebirth. But Hall also sprinkles in throughout that whole chapter, really all this stuff about the myth of the dying god, which again is something I really want to dig into in a whole episode at some point, as well as I think a companion episode of the history and the lineage of goddess worship, which is also equally fascinating. But I've got one other interesting historical initiation for us.
Okay. That sounds really cool. Yeah, I mean, I think we should do the goddess one first, personally.
Yeah,
Anyway, the idea.
yeah. I don't care which order we
Just
do
kidding.
them in.
Just kidding. The idea of a sarcophagus being used as a sensory deprivation tank is super fascinating. It's very fun, regardless of the historical accuracy. So,
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's a neat idea. Anyway, so we know people, the pyramids were used to bury people. We don't know if they were used for anything else. I would speculate, it's probably likely that they were because of their size, the amount of time and effort taken to construct them. But, we don't have the evidence to prove it, and we probably never will. I mean, who knows what was in the Library of Alexandria when it burned down? We could be colonizing space right now, had we not had, so many book burnings, accidental or intentional, taking place throughout our history. But hey,
oh my god, I think about that all the fucking time.
it's like the greatest tragedy of history. When I tell kids that in my history class, they're like, it breaks kids' hearts. And
Maybe we should talk about this in a separate episode where we talk about the occult and science and that history.
sure, I'm down.
Cool.
But hey, let's keep moving. So I'll make this one quick because oh my gosh, we've got to be sitting on over an hour an episode right now. So okay, I'll make this fast.
It's fine,
The-
man. It's fine. It should be as long as it needs to be.
You're right. You're right.
It's all good.
All right, so 1978, you got Gordon Wasson, Albert Hoffman, and Carl P. Ruck. They published this book together titled The Road to Eleusis, Unveiling the Secret of the Mysteries. And their book, they come at the Elysian mysteries from a scientific, a mythological, and psychedelic and spiritual kind of angles, right?
Mhm.
The mysteries were steeped in the mythology of the cults of Demeter and Persephone and involved the ingestion of a psychedelic psychoactive brew called chitin, brewed from barley that was infected with ergot fungus, which many of you know is the fungus used by Albert Hoffman to synthesize LSD. But as many people are aware, ergot contains some other potent chemicals and poisons in it, I guess. I don't know. You're a botanist. You could probably speak to this.
Well, I mean, it is a, it's mushroom. It's. I'm not a mycologist. No, I'm just kidding. It has all kinds
Fine.
of crazy shit in it. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. The ancient Greeks, like the masterwork of the Amazonians who crafted ayahuasca, figured out a way to brew their sacrament such that it minimized the negative effects and maximized the LSD like effects. So the deal was basically this: every Greek citizen who had not stained their hands with human blood was welcome to come to the temple once during their life and be initiated into the mysteries. And of course, like all good things, eventually it gets corrupted. The Greek aristocracy figures out how to make it, and they host like private party. Before we move ahead, I want to bring us back around a little bit. And there's this tidbit of spiral dance that I pulled out that I feel merits a little bit of discussion, or at least just mentioning. So here goes. We must strip ourselves of our defenses, pretensions, masks, of our clothing and our jewels, all that we assume and put on in order to cross that threshold and enter the inner kingdom. The door opens only to the naked body of truth, bound by cords, our recognition of mortality. Delightful whimsy or sinister nonsense?
You know what? I think it's kind of both and neither.
All right. Is that indeterminate?
Mm, here, I think I might have an inkling of what she's talking about. Let me try to unpack. So, in order to enter the inner kingdom, or the mysteries, or start the journey, one must be willing to shed their identity, which is kind of like a sort of symbolic death, or ego death, maybe. You have to be willing to give it all up, maybe, in order to learn about detachment. Detachment's important in chaos magic and other traditions too, right?
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of a helpful tool in general. The idea of like entering the inner kingdom, it reminds me of like psychonautic exploration and astral stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I also kind of reminded of Plato's Republic, which is really more of a treatise about like how one should order the republic of one's own mind, too. So that whole kind of inner kingdom thing. There's
Yeah.
so much, yeah, there's so much crossover between magic and psychology. In fact, like some people think that magic is all psychology, right? That's one way of looking at it. I obviously have no fucking idea myself, but most occult traditions, at least the ones I've heard about, have introspection as somewhat of like a central theme. So
Yeah.
it kind of fits, you know?
I think like a lot of religions in general.
Sure. Yeah, man. All right, so the next part is the doors open only to the naked body of truth bound by cords, our recognition of mortality. I think the idea behind this is that you have to stand in your truth or be naked and unable to hide anything in order to like decide what will be. One first must acknowledge what is. Part of what is the reality of life, and that everything is, you know, impermanent. All things, even the universe itself, will end. All that lives is bound to die. You already mentioned the like ritual binding and blindfolding and all that stuff, and I'm sure we could talk more about that. And we can also save it for the sex magic episode. And take an interlude.
Are we going to talk about binding and blindfolding in the sex magic episode?
I mean, like, are we?
I hope so.
I don't know why we wouldn't.
All right, interlude, interlude.
All right. Today's episode is brought to you by the Three of Wands. All right. So, like always, I'm going to talk about my understanding of the card. And if you disagree, that is totally cool. Whatever. Okay. I'd like to start with the numerology. And to do this, I would like to read a little bit about the concept of three from a very cool little book called Sacred Number: The Hidden Qualities of Quantities by Miranda Lundy. You guys should check this thing out. It's super cool. It's full of insightful poetic musings like about numbers, like really cool and informative like little illustrations and some really great tidbits about math and its like history. All right, so here goes. The triad relates to opposites and their commixture, solution or mediator. The synthesis or return to unity after the division of two. The third leg of a stool gives it balance. The third strand of a braid makes a plate. Knots can only be tied in three-dimensional space. Fairy tales and other stories abound with portentous threes. juggling past, present, and future with the knower, knowing, and the known. Everybody loves threes, right?
Totally. Yeah.
It comes up everywhere, so I'm sure that this isn't the last that we'll hear from three.
No.
So the zodiac association with the Three of Wands is Aries, which kind of makes sense because this card is all about like finally having what you need together to set out on your journey. Aries is, it's a charging ram, kind of embodies activation and initiative and initiation. It's the first sign of the zodiac too, so that makes sense. And the Rider Waite Coleman Smith deck, the Three of Wands shows a figure standing at the top of a hill. Their back is turned to the viewer as they gaze out over an expanse of water where ships can be seen, like, kind of coming and going. The figure is standing between two staffs, and their right hand is grasping a third, which looks as though it's going to be used as a walking staff. So the idea of, like, kind of setting out on a quest leaps to mind here. The two upright rods on either side of the figure are also kind of reminiscent of a gateway. We can see the mountains in the background across the water. Water usually symbolizes like subconscious, right? I was kind of reminded of the idea of the inner kingdom again, like we just sort of talked about. Maybe it's going to take braving those waters to get to the mountains. So, in Franz Varden's Initiation into Hermetics, the author says this about the tarot cards. Many know, of course, that the word tarot does not mean a game of cards serving magical purposes, but a symbolic book of initiation, which contains the greatest secrets in symbolic form. The first tablet of this book introduces the magician, representing him as the master of the elements and offering the key to the first arcanum. So we could definitely have gone with the magician for this one, but as Burton points out, like each card in the deck depicts its own type of initiation, its own step in the journey. So I think this is a good time to underline again the point that initiation really is an ongoing process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the fool's journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we are to the discussion portion of our episode here.
Yeah, let's talk about our
Yeah.
experiences with initiation.
All right, I've got a few initiation experiences that I think are worth discussing. Obviously, I've been through many modern cultural initiations. We discussed much of that kind of earlier on in our episode. I was actually baptized Catholic around like 11, I think. My mom converted to Catholicism. This is usually done to a child like as soon as possible, like as soon after birth as possible. But for me, it was like late, and also like I don't think I definitely wasn't committed to it. That's for sure. Um, but you they want to baptize that baby young, save that sweet boy from the flames of Lucifer. But yeah, I don't really have a problem with Christians. I think I should point that out. I just grew up in a really conservative Christian town. So anyway, one of my first probably real life changing initiations, in a spiritual sense, was around 19 or 20. I'd been experimenting with psychedelics for a little while, and my first trip was a rite of passage, but it wasn't really like initiation in itself. So I got when my supply, my dealer or whatever of like LSD and mushrooms and stuff had sort of like dried up. I got into like ethnobotany, and found this really neat book, The Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants by Christian Ratzich, and began experimenting with some more like plant-based visionary experiences. I want to mention before we go any further, I like really don't recommend to anyone that you go out and do this. There is like so much you need to know about plants and about yourself and about your diet and your medications before you start like walking down, that path effectively. It can be dangerous. Anyway,
Yeah, don't.
just don't.
Don't, you
Um
do you, but don't.
right, right, right. Um, anyway, so I was getting ready to move to the Pacific Islands for a while and decided to look into like what native plants were out there that I could harvest to continue working in this way. And I found Hawaiian baby wood rose, which turned out to be an option. The seeds of which contain LSA, which can be used as a precursor to LSD, similar to morning glory seeds. And just like morning glory seeds, the shells contain like a low dose of cyanide, which makes you like sick to your stomach when you eat them. I'm not really going to go into a huge amount of detail about everything that happened the first time I did this. What I've called the Tale of Eight Seeds, which will be included in the book on my sort of particular occult I've been working on for the past year. I'm thinking about calling it Primer, which, I hope to have done by the end of quarantine, but who knows? But long story short, this was like my first real bad trip. But, with all things bad, you can learn a lot of good from it if you pay attention to what's going on, what's going through your head, what you're experiencing. And after like sort of like the peak, I actually had a really valuable experience. I tapped into, I believe anyway, what people refer to as the Akashic record. I wasn't alone. I felt like I was guided through this experience by some other force or of some kind. Maybe spirit of the plant, or maybe whatever capital T truth is, Triton, God, whatever you want to refer to it as, I don't know. But ultimately, I learned that I know nothing, and I think that's where like my journey really began.
Yeah, man. Uh, that's awesome. I definitely hear what you're saying about like taking a bad and scary situation and like actually learning what you can from it. I'm super stoked about the book too. That sounds super interesting. I'm tempted to share one of my experiences with hallucinogens here, but I think I'm gonna save that, and instead I'm gonna go all the way back to when I was a kid and when I first did magic.
All right.
And like most of the stories that I tell on this show, it's probably gonna be pretty embarrassing. That's okay. Here goes.
No, it's good. I think for our listeners anyway. Maybe it's good for you too. I don't know.
I don't know. I had picked up some candles and like a few books from a little occult bookstore that I could walk to from my school. I was probably somewhere around 11 or 12. Things have been pretty frustrating for me. It's kind of a hard age no matter what, I think. But my parents had gotten divorced and everything was like really chaotic, both like in my head and in my life. So I was like sitting there in my bedroom floor. I think I had made like a little circle out of like string or something, and I was like staring into the flame of a candle, like concentrating on my like wish or whatever, like which I had written on a piece of paper, and I was gonna burn it, and then bury it. And as I did this, I remember having the sensation of a sort of like internal transformation, like all the like fear and anger and frustration and like loneliness and all of it like began to sort of like rearrange into something else, like this strong desire. I mean, I think what I was feeling there was like the first like inklings of like will with the capital W. The notion that even though it didn't feel like it, I still actually did have agency. And so the psychological impact of this action, performing this like little spell was actually huge for me. And that's to be expected, as we've discussed. But after I was done, I felt a lot better. I had actually done something, even if it was by myself and nobody else would ever know. I had a secret. I had, something. So the note that I had burned said, I have power. So I've actually never spoken of this before, but I think it's safe to do it now.
Yeah, your wish was true all along, but you solidified it in action. You willed it forward. It's pretty awesome self-initiation. I'm curious how your magical thinking might have changed after that experience.
Yeah, no, dude, that's a good question. Like, I think in terms of like using magical thinking as like a useful tool, which is something that we're planning to talk about here pretty soon. It's hard to say like exactly since it was so long ago, but I do think that my attitude towards like everything sort of changed. This kind of played out in my attitude towards authority. Well, because of my age and because of what was going on in my life and because of practicing witchcraft. I think I got the first brushes of like the existential dread and the knowledge that no one really knows exactly what they're doing, even though always like everybody's always like seeming to pretend that they do.
Yeah.
I sort of had this idea that all of us, humans, we're all on equal footing, and how dare anyone try to tell me what I'm supposed to do? I'm sure I was a delight.
I still feel that way today. So
Yes, I mean, it's typical teen angst attitude, I know, but some of it actually does stand up to logical scrutiny. Like, I still think we should be less like dogs and more like cats in terms of how we interact with our institutions.
no dogs, no masters.
I think my practice definitely helped. me sort of keep the rebellious spirit alive as I underwent subsequent conditioning in school and work and life in general. I don't know. Let's hear another one of your stories, though.
All right. Um, this one is again psychedelic related, but the other experience, it's intense depending on how serious you take it. But I found it interesting when it happened to me. The one time I was just wandering around town at night with some friends, all of us on LSD. And this was like early 2000s, like way like back in the day. We bumped into some friends of a friend in this like sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's a common like nightlife, but also like daytime, like just like general use space that was in this small city that we were in. It wasn't really a park, but it's sort of like if a bunch of businesses faced each other and then you took the road away and turned it into like a place with benches and a fountain,
Yeah, it's
kind of
like a
like
business
park.
park. I think they call it a business park.
Do they?
I
Okay,
think
yeah,
so.
and like just like people would hang out there. It wasn't necessarily like it was also like a really weird space. It was like very like all the shops were very like hippy dippy and stuff like that. And there's some really kick ass pizza there. Anyway, um I must have been it must have been like 11 at night, and this guy was like, "Oh, you're tripping. Lay down on the ground, close your eyes." And we all did this. And so what he'd do is he'd tap your leg and then run your hand like run his hand like down your leg from like thigh to foot and be like, "Let all the blood run out of your leg." And then he did this on both sides and then to the arms and the chest, and then he'd finally like tap you on the head and be like, "You're dead." Now tripping is like kind of an intense experience, right? Especially if you have a really good imagination already and you're like willing to get into it. But the next thing he did was he grabbed your hands and like abruptly pull you forward, which like obviously made people's eyes like shoot wide open, as you're like rushing up into the seated position. And as you open your eyes, he would say, "The past is behind you. Welcome to your new life," which was super crazy intense. I think like a good psychological spiritual cleanse that I guess I wouldn't mind going through every couple of years or so.
That's wild, man. I don't know whether to be horrified or delighted.
Delightful whimsy or sinister nonsense. I'm going with both on this one.
So this story is especially apropos because you got a little taste of the death and rebirth symbology that so many paths make use of.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was completely spontaneous, which made it exceptionally powerful and meaningful to me. I think a lot of religious initiations, at least a little bit what to expect as you might not entirely know what to expect, but this entirely unexpected experience was like more impactful because I didn't know I was walking into it. I didn't know what was going to happen. It just happened. So I think if like I was the high priest of like a coven or organized group of magicians, i I would tailor the initiation to be specific to each initiate and make it like completely different than any of the other initiations that came before it, so like it couldn't really be prepared for. I feel like it would be more powerful that way. But I don't know. This is just me thinking out loud.
No, dude, hell yeah, I totally agree. Like, even if we're not part of a group or whatever, this is something that we should all be doing for ourselves. It's just super effective tech. Maybe we should design one as a fun bonus and put it on our Patreon?
Ooh, initiation? Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that idea. You know what? We've been working on that digital grimoire. We could put it in there.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Yeah. We will get you a initiation ritual somehow. You know, we could start our own occult religion first before we initiate people. Then we could initiate people into our religion. Join our Patreon today and get initiated into the delightful whimsy of our sinister nonsense and rise with the sun and achieve godhood. All of this could be yours for the low price of your soul and your eternal faithful devotion.
Absolutely. And I propose it should also be required that each member submit at least one dirty limerick per year to the High Council of Elders for review in order to remain in good standing with the order. All right, so you did two. I guess I can do another one. The first one that comes to mind actually is like pretty recent, right? Like I'm gonna say it's the first joint ritual that we did,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
where we did the initiation for our servitor Gav bag. Like I think that was definitely, I would point to that as being like, well, yeah, I've never done that before, and it was pretty crazy. So yeah,
yeah, definitely. That was a really fun experience, and it continues to be a really fun experience, actually.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
I was just thinking earlier, was it earlier today or yesterday when I was putting together the video for Delightful Whimsy or Sinister Nonsense Round One? That yeah, it was Thursday, so it was the morning after we birthed Gab Bag, and all of a sudden, all of the problems I had with editing and making the video work for that just suddenly were like, it's fine now. So that's cool development.
Yeah, dude, I've been seeing a marked reduction in technical difficulties as well.
Yeah, awesome, good stuff. We'll keep you posted on how that's working out.
Yeah, hell yeah.
All right,
So how about some homework here?
yeah, we should have a little homework. It's two-parter. First thing we'd like you to do is sit down with a pad of paper or a Google Doc or an Etch a Sketch, whatever works best for you, and make a detailed list of all of the rites of passage you've been through in your life. What was significant about them? What happened specifically? How did these things affect you? What would you have done differently if you had to do it over? After you have all your notes, think about them for a while, add details that come to mind that maybe you missed, or think on paper, generate how you feel about these things. Do a little more journaling if you like. So just take some time, maybe a few days, a week, consider them, meditate on them. Think about the things about these experiences that were really meaningful for you, powerful, liberating, terrifying, sad, and make notes about what conclusions or realizations you come to. The second part is to take your notes and begin designing a personal initiation ritual. Even if you don't intend on actually carrying it out or doing it, it's a good thought experiment and good ritual writing practice.
Hell yeah, dude. And you know what? Like, even if you don't actually do it, like, the fact that you made it is also significant. We'll talk more about that in pathworking. Uh,
There's also some like ego work in there too, right? You're deconstructing some of your past experiences and like kind of digging into sort of like the emotional side of things that have affected you in your life.
oh,
So
yeah,
it's a few different things, kind of all
definitely. And
wrapped in
like,
one.
yeah, like you said earlier, it's all connected. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's get the hell out of here and do some work cited, shall we?
All right. Yeah. The Anthropology of Religion, Magic, and Witchcraft by Rebecca and Philip Stein.
Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft by Raymond Buckland.
The Spiral Dance by Starhawk.
Solitary Witch by Silver Ravenwolf.
The Road to Eleusis by Wasson, Hoffman, and Ruck.
The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall.
Son of Chicken Kabbalah by Lon Milo Duquette.
Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barton.
Sacred Number, The Hidden Qualities of Quantities by Miranda Ludi. And I feel like we usually have, or in the past few episodes, we've had a longer sort of statement or poem or quote. But, I felt called to this specific quote from Liber Null by Peter J. Carroll to use as our closing today. And it's short and sweet. And he writes this: Self alone is God and should recognize itself in all things.
Good stuff. All right, so if you have had some interesting experiences with the rites of passage or initiation into a coven, sect, order, or something that maybe you did on your own, and you'd like to share it with us, please drop us a line at foolsguidetotheoccult@gmail.com, and that's the number 2. And tell us about your personal initiations that you designed as your homework. We want to hear about it.
Yeah, definitely. Also, please like us on Facebook and join our community page off our main Facebook page. That community page is Fellow Travelers. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Fool's Guide. Several people have messaged us there, and I try and get back to people as soon as possible. So a little bit of dialogue going on there as well.
Yeah, cool, man. I mean, and if you're into the show, which you probably are if you listen to it this long, um, and you want to hear us talk about like more crazy stuff, like the occult and pop culture, or our book club dialogues discussing quantum psychology by Robert Anton Wilson, please consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/FG the number 2TO. We tend to get a little bit more wild with our Patreon content. We've been working pretty hard to like get a lot of cool stuff up there. So by the time this episode comes out, we may even have some cool surprises. So you never know.
Yeah, definitely. We definitely want to like keep this show. At least I don't know. I've gone back and forth about this, but I feel like I'd love to keep this show ad free. You know, it's kind of a labor of love. But you know, we could also really use some new equipment, like some better microphones and stuff like that, and resources to help out with research and stuff.
I mean, it costs, yeah, it costs us money to make it. So yeah.
Yeah, totally, and time and shit, whatever.
Mhm.
But anyway, so our Patreon is pay what you can with like a $1 minimum. That's all access. There's no tiers, nothing like that. So like every dollar helps, and we so much appreciate it.
Yeah, hell yeah. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening. We are going to get out of here. So until the next time, take care of yourselves and have an excellent day or night.
Cheers.